Hey everybody, I'm Adam. 7 years ago, I quit the American dream to travel to some of the most interesting places around the world.
All right, so let's talk about this concept here in Singapore of do the ends justify the means? And this is a really tricky thing. Yesterday I went on a free walking tour for the Chinatown neighborhood, and yeah, what I learned was really disturbing, really quite shocking. I guess, of course, you have to maybe expect a little bit of this type of story and this type of history in a place like Singapore that's developed so quickly in the last 60 years. You know, I mean, it sounds like, and from what I've seen, basically kind of a little fishing village, not very developed. Of course, it was somehow also a big port for the British and the Dutch at times, but yeah, somehow there's a lot of, I don't know, it's a bit confusing because they kind of tell this story of this like poor fishing village, really run down, especially destroyed after Japan invaded in World War II, and basically that they really didn't have much, and that it was like very run down and not developed at all. We heard this story yesterday in the tour about Chinatown slums and how it was just such a run down, and that the living conditions were so poor for the residents in Chinatown. I mean, just living conditions that I feel I've only heard about rarely through history books and through documentaries, but I'm hearing about this directly from a guy who grew up in Chinatown. He said he's about 55 years old now. Here we are, and he grew up in these conditions, but you know, he doesn't even look that old. He looked like he was maybe 40, but he says he's 55. He promised us that this was the true story, but that these living conditions were just so bad. So many people, so many families living with only, no walls practically, no privacy, very low quality, like one toilet for 40 people, one kitchen for 40 people, hygienic and cleanliness standards non-existent. It's just unbelievable what he told us. So essentially his message was Singapore has come a really long way in the last 50, 60, 70 years. And that he's incredibly grateful to be Singaporean because after the British and then the Japanese left Singapore, and after Singapore gained a little bit more of its own freedom and autonomy and independence, that the local leaders here, the local government, was basically able to turn things around, to develop this place so that life would be better here, would be a lot better here for the local people, the local citizenry, the local population. And that he and his family and thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people just like him were raised out of this abject, awful, barely livable conditions. And I think this is the challenging point I see with Singapore. And I mean, this has happened, I guess, throughout all sorts of history. Whether you're looking at a lot of colonial powers from Europe back in the day, to I get a lot of shade thrown at me when some people, when they hear that I'm American and when they have their own frustrations and critiques about America and America's history. But the governments, politicians, the powers that be have really abused and taken advantage of people throughout history. And that essentially through this new Singaporean government back in the 50s, 60s, that they really turned things around for their local citizens. And the proof, as we say, the proof is in the pudding. You know, I'm here, and you can really tell that this place has been saved, has been rescued, has from the old pictures, from the old stories. It seems this place has been brought into modernity, and it is highly functioning, prosperous. But it still brings to this question, do the ends justify the means? What these governments and powers that be, the heavy-handed iron fist type of ruling, and the PAP in Singapore seems to have its own checkered history of potentially questionable things that it's done to ensure its somewhat monopoly on power. But what it's been able to do, and what it's been able to create, and what it's been able to give to its people here, did that justify those actions? And of course, the Dutch, the traders and the merchants and the empires that used Singapore in the past for its incredible geographic, essential, important trading position and logistics and freight position. You know, when I hear these stories, it's obviously inexcusable how, I believe, the Dutch and then the British after them, what they did with this place, how they treated the local population and how they took advantage of them. That's, of course, inexcusable. And some of the things that these massive powers, also like my home country, and what they've done in their past, what they've done to secure their place in the world, what they've done to secure their futures and the livelihoods of their citizenry, and the standard and the luxury or the prosperity of their countries. They've done some pretty wicked and perhaps completely inexcusable things. But does that kind of justify, by creating that safe and secure, prosperous life here for their people, does that justify their heavy-handed techniques and methods? And it's very conflicting. I feel very conflicted with Singapore so far, because I feel the life that they've created here for their citizens and for their people. And he said yesterday, you know, it doesn't matter here if you're Malaysian or Chinese or Indian or Indonesian or now you're Singaporean. You know, if you have something with merit, if you have something with value and quality to bring here, you know, you're welcome here, and you will help Singapore prosper, and Singapore will help you prosper. So they've created a great life here, and they've done it with a fairly cautious, mindful approach to nationality, ethnicity, cultural, linguistic. But it is very conflicting, and that's what I've heard from a lot of locals, a lot of Singaporeans, is this trade-off between safety, security, prosperity, even a little bit of luxury, to lift the masses and the public out of desperation and poverty. But what have they had to trade for those things? The nature, you know, they've destroyed much of the coastline here with reclaimed land. Much of this island used to be a tropical rainforest to some extent, and most of that is now gone in trade-off for living space for their citizenry. Yeah, it's just very tricky. Who am I to judge? But it is something I think that we have to think about at times in our lives. And also like a career and money and material possessions, right? What are we willing to trade off for those things? For wealth, for the Benz, for the BMW, for the Gucci, the Prada, the Rolex, the the Tesla, the latest gadgets and gizmos and iPhones. What are we willing to trade off for these things with our life, with our time, with our free time, with our community, with our friends, our family? It's a very philosophical question, but it's good for us to reflect on How much are we willing to trade and give up for these sorts of things? In order for Singapore to prosper, they had to somehow play ball with a lot of the West, somehow play ball with oil, with fossil fuel companies, and it's hard to blame them. A lot of other countries are doing this, so why shouldn't they get in on it? And I think something that's also even more tricky is that a lot of the people here are either first generation, second generation, new immigrants that come from very tough conditions in countries around South Asia, Southeast Asia, China, etc. And it's very wild and very interesting to see how in just a generation or two, they've gone from very tough conditions. They've gotten themselves out of those positions. Now they're living in this prosperity. And I just hope that we don't forget the rest of the world, right? Or where we came from. You know, we leave these situations behind us that are tough and challenging. In a way, we're escaping that poverty, those conflicts, those crises. And I just hope for a lot of them, just like me with my family, I hope for a lot of them we don't forget where we come from. We don't forget the people or the places that we've left behind. And I fear a little bit that Singapore has been in this survival mode, just trying to secure its own peace, trying to secure its own prosperity. I just hope it doesn't forget the nations and the places where these people came from. Well, that's that's the philosophy moment for the day. Thanks for tuning in. I know I might not have covered this perfectly. I feel very just conflicted with it. Still going to be here in Singapore for quite a while longer. So more ideas and more reflections coming soon. And please let me know what you think. Do the ends justify the means? You know, to what extent, I guess it's an ethical question, right? But to what extent does our goal, does our vision justify and validate the actions that we take today? At what point do we potentially become that which we despise, that which we hated, that which in a way we never wanted to get involved with in the first place? And let's not forget all of the people that are involved, and let's not forget to try and make the world a better place and to give back as much as we can, as we have more power than we think. Take care, everybody.